Classic Restos, proudly brought to you by Shannons, where you can be part of the Shannons Club. Penrite Oil, Hare and Forbes Machinery House, Pace Farm, and Duncan Foster Engineering. Hello and welcome to another episode of Classic Restos here in Detroit, United States of America, and this trip is thanks to Shannons. I am hoping that this week's episode will make your jaw drop and your eyes fall out of your head on springs as I bring you one of the most opulent car collections in the world. But first, here are some important commercials from people that are great to deal with. It's thanks to Shannons. Ask about multi-policy discounts and sign up for the Shannons Club. Call 134646 for a quote and see more at shannons.com.au. For oils, coolants, additives and technical assistance, oil right, use Penrite. And Hare and Forbes has the range. Buy online at machineryhouse.com.au. Well, get ready. Here we go. Welcome to just some of the Stahls Classic Car Collection. The Stahls Automotive Foundation is a non-profit organisation that exists in order to preserve, restore and exhibit specific vintage vehicles of the 20th century for educational purposes and to leave you in awe. Every one of the vintage cars and vehicles demonstrates special creativity and imagination in their engineering and design. Each car was chosen based on the engineering achievements that made it an important part of the evolution of the automobile. The Stahls Automotive Collection features continually changing exhibitions or historically significant cars from the Depression and Art Deco eras, along with automotive memorabilia. The Stahls Collection takes you back in time, a time when cars were more than just a way to take us from point A to point B. Doesn't get much better than this. The incredible Stahls Collection here in Detroit. How you doing, John?
Very well, Fletch.
Nice to see you again.
Oh, it's always great to see you.
And thank you for coming in on a Sunday as well.
Well, that's our pleasure.
Awesome. Now, look, we've got a 1947 Delahaye behind us.
That's right.
Now, look, you're going to have to educate me here. I really know nothing about this car. All I do know is it just looks stunning. What's the story?
Delahaye was a manufacturer of sporting sort of cars, French manufacturer. Their engine is basically a truck engine that's tuned to produce more, but where they really excelled was in the style. They're such a stylish automobile. This particular one, the design was designed by Henry Chapon and built by the Dutch bodybuilder Pennock, which really produces a very sleek, stunning automobile.
It's different too that we've got a French car in an American museum, but you do touch on brands from around the world, which is a nice touch.
Well, we've branched out. Ted has recently started to look at other countries, other parts of the world, and this was part of a batch of European cars that came in one day.
Now, back in 1947, I guess what market would that have been aimed at, John?
Oh, someone of means that in France that wanted, or in Europe, who wanted a very sporty-looking car. Yeah. That had matched with performance.
I tell you what, back in 1947, you'd want your croissant stand to be selling well, wouldn't you, before you got one of them?
You would. You'd want to be moving a lot of berets.
Absolutely. Nicely appointed inside as well. Dashboard has a nice layout. The upholstery's nice. It's got a nice line to the whole car. It's not a high car. It sits fairly low. It's fairly wide. It's got lovely fenders. I could just imagine that gliding through the air nicely.
It drives beautifully. I've had the pleasure of taking out this summer and taking it to shows, and it's a pleasure to drive.
Alrighty. Now we're going to move on to another car. What do you got in mind, John?
Let's go look at the 1915 Alf Rhino.
1915 Alf Rhino. Goodness me. Let's go. Come this way, John. I don't even know what the guy's talking about. You know, John, I can't believe how many manufacturers built incredible machines so long ago. Around 2,500 manufacturers in America started and failed, which all meant production plants, staff to some extent, whether they ran a few years, a decade. But something like this behind us, an Alf Rhino. I can see where the Rhino comes from.
That's right, Fletch. There actually was never a Rhino, and the Alf is shortened from American La France. This started life out as a fire engine, and was for many years. It was stowed away in a barn and forgotten. And then when it was found, it was too far gone to really make a fire engine out of again. So the new owner had an idea. Why not replicate the great thoroughbred race cars that were made from these things, which was a practice back in the old days.
Well, I mean, it's like a Stutz on steroids.
Oh, it is. Oh, it is,
I mean,
yes.
It's running on a truck chassis. The tyres out the back look like they're off a truck. But yet you've got that opulent addition of all the brass work to highlight the car as well. An individual windscreen in a circle in front of the steering wheel. I mean, everything's just so incredibly different.
It is. It is. It's really a throwback to the 1915 racing era, and things you saw like the locomobiles that ran back then, but bigger. Like you say, everything is so much bigger.
Yeah, it's like a chitty chitty bang bang type car. Give it huge back wheels, but just a little tiny windscreen. Like just the thinking of proportion of the car, the geometry of the aesthetics it's just in another era, isn't it?
It really is, and the numbers on it are so impressive. It's 1,000 cubic inch 6-cylinder engine.
1,000 cubes.
And the car can go 100 miles an hour.
Well, I tell you what, don't mind saying, but I would not like to be in that at 100 miles an hour.
I think you'd be afraid at 30.
The thing is too, the side pipes of the exhaust, I mean, that just reminds me that's like aircraft.
It is. It's straight out. It's straight out. You have the choice of going through the exhaust system or going straight out. And at that point, it becomes a fire-belching monster.
Now, I don't want this to sound a silly question because the car is so old, but it must have a mountain of torque. It's a powerful car?
Very powerful car. Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah. It's just hard to believe that back in 1915 that something could go so well, but I guess there were exceptions such as this.
Would you like to hear what it sounds like?
Yeah.
We can do that.
All right. Hey, have a listen to this.
Fletch, in order to start this, there's a few things you have to do. First off, we have to turn the battery on. That's right here. We need fuel. We turn the fuel on. Now we come over here, we set the choke, we turn the power on.
You are watching just some of the amazing Stahls collection here in Detroit, United States of America, and you're watching it first on Classic Restos. Back with more right after this.
We've always had a few cars. They're all special. The T-Bird.
Oh, that's mine.
The Combi for when we want to get away. The XR8.
It's going to be a classic.
They're all insured with Shannons,
We've also got Shannons Home and Contents cover.
which helps protect our automotive collectibles, tools and memorabilia in the home and garage. If you're motoring enthusiasts like us, it's got to be.
Shannons.
Shannons Insurance for motoring enthusiasts. Call 13 46 46 for a quote.
Penrite, Australian-made, family-owned and operated. Make premium quality engine and racing oils, warranty-approved coolants, automatic transmission and manual gear oils, a complete range of engine and fuel additives, heavy-duty and industrial products for every application. Visit penriteoil.com for more information. Penrite, Australian-made for Australian conditions since 1926.
If you have a restoration project, Hare and Forbes has the tools that you need. Look at these restoration products: shrinker stretchers, dollies, mallets, bead rollers, profile gauges, professional panel restoration kits, and so much more. Now I warn you, enter at your own risk because you will end up buying something. So come along to your Cap City store or browse and buy online at machineryhouse.com.au because Heron Forbes has the range.
The Stahls Collection began in 1995, innocently enough with the purchase of one car, a Ford Model A. Along the way, Ted felt the want and the desire to create the Stahls Foundation, which operates this museum now. The collection is over 140 cars to date. Well, coming to work here every day is like going to Disneyland. A classic car means something that is designed to be beautiful, designed to have utility, but to have a beauty in its design and its execution, and have the lines and the grace of another time period. The musical instruments came along in 2012. There was an auction at the Milhouse Brothers Museum in Boca Raton, Florida. Ted went to buy one little music box and came back with several automatic playing musical instruments, the largest of which is the Mortier dance organ, which was made in Belgium in 1926. And it's 31 feet long, it's 16 feet high and 4 feet deep, and it's quite loud. It's meant to make very danceable music and fight the sound of 300 drunk Belgians dancing.
It's amazing to think that back in 1932 that Cadillac did a V16. Not only did they do that, they dropped that incredible engine into such an opulent vehicle sitting behind us, John.
They did. They wanted to have the ultimate power plant of smoothness. Not brute power, but smoothness. And 16 cylinders was the way.
Did it work for them?
It worked very well. Worked very well.
Only a limited time in production, though.
1930 to 1937 for the first iteration, 1938 and 39 for the second. And then after that, the whole multi-cylinder thing was really over. The best customer with the deepest pockets was very happy with 8.
I mean, what an era. It gets back to that time of the Depression where people were riding bicycles to work. Who bought these cars?
Someone with $6,000. So this was a captain of industry, a motion picture star, a Broadway personality, someone who was very well rewarded for their work.
Yeah, because here in the US, I mean, cars in the 1970s were $6,000.
They were, and at the time this car was made, this was $6,000. A brand new Ford or Chevrolet that a person would have been very happy with was $550. New, bought and paid for.
That's a contrast, isn't it? It certainly sorts out what you can afford when you go from one end of the spectrum like that to the other.
Well, and that's General Motors' thing of a car for every purse and person.
Name some of the features. Just run a few off that came in the 30s on this particular Cadillac, John.
You have power-assisted brakes, vacuum power-assisted brakes. You have hydraulic lifters, which is the first time they appeared on an American car. You have a lot of electric lighting. You have a division window that cranks up and down, and a roof that goes up, a top that goes up and down, with 2 experienced men, 15 minutes, and a lot of sweating and swearing.
Okay, John, right next door here with the Stutz, we've got a V32. I mean, these are incredible symbols, symbolic of the time. We're looking at 322 cubes, a luxury car. How did that compare to the likes of Cadillac of the same era?
It was a comparable car. It was 32 valves per engine. It's an 8-cylinder car, not a 16, but the numbers were what was important. With the advent of the V16 and Marmon's V16, 32 was twice as much.
I can imagine the war that must have been going on with manufacturers back then. I mean, Cadillac came out with an actual V16 with 16 cylinders. Stutz couldn't do that, but hey, let's give it 4 valves per cylinder and we'll bump Cadillac off with the badging.
That's right. And what they did is they created a poor man's Duesenberg.
Right.
It's essentially a Stutz version of a Duesenberg engine at a fraction of the price.
Right. So the 322 cubic inch displacement, 155 horsepower, a lot of torque to go with it as well. I mean, these cars back in the time, these would have been movers.
Oh, they were. They were. You could, if the roads will allow it, and that's the caveat. Yeah. You could go quite quickly in these cars. Yes.
Okay, mention some of the features of the Stutz here, John.
The Stutz is the chassis, internal chassis lubrication. It's manual, but there's pipes plumbed to every moving part of the chassis, and it shoots a little shoot of oil every time you pull this handle. You've got the DV32 engine, a fully synchronized transmission.
I mean, they were just so opulent, weren't they? I mean, in their styling and their paint codes, contrasting just the body lines, the running boards, the spare tyres up on there. I mean, they just made a statement, didn't they?
Well, no one could make an ugly car then. No. They were all beautiful. Even a Plymouth or a Ford was a stately car, and then if you put a little length to it, like a Stutz, it just got better.
I'm Terry Coppins. I'm General Manager here at Stahls Automotive Collection. I am very passionate about my position here. These cars mean so much to me. I love the history and the stories that they bring to life. When visitors come here and they tell me their stories and their histories with the cars, and it just brings a smile to their faces, so just brings a smile to mine. I believe everybody has a car story, and they come in here and they get a chance to relive that story, whether it be from when they were young and riding in it with their grandfather or the first car that they got to purchase on their own. And we just love to hear those stories.
In 2017, you will see more on a Fletch tour. Have a look at this. There is nothing quite like a Fletch tour. Carlisle or Ford Nationals, GM Nationals and Chrysler Nationals await you.
Book a Fletch tour. It's amazing.
Seen some absolutely amazing cars. What an event.
Experience Route 66 from Chicago to Vegas, or choose the Detroit tour.
I would make it a point to go to Fletch Tours and come to Detroit.
There are 5 Fletch tours. Select the one that suits you best. See FletchTours.com or contact All Things Travel, Lara.
I spend a lot of time out here. The RT Charger's the real deal. An E49. Remember A-Charger? I've always got projects on the go, so Shannon's laid-up cover helps protect my restorations. I'm Mopar through and through. It's a passion Shannons understands. I wouldn't insure my cars and bikes with anyone else.
Shannons Insurance for motoring enthusiasts. Call 13 46 46 for a quote.
Hare and Forbes Machinery House has been family owned and operated for over 85 years, and it's easy to see why. And with a range like this, you cannot go wrong. Planning on welding? Look at these welding tables and clamps, air compressors and different air tools, sandblasting cabinets, through to spray guns. Everyone is welcome at Machinery House, and they're also open Saturday mornings. Their range of machine tools are workshop tested. There are competitive freight rates around Australia, and you can buy online at machineryhouse.com.au. So remember, Hare and Forbes has the range.
In 1926, Australia's Penrite Oil Company was established. Almost 90 years of research, development and refining under the harsh Australian conditions has made Penrite Oil what it is today. Precision, performance, reliability and protection. Championship winning products. Trust Penrite.
A 1912 International Harvester. This is incredible. John, what words would you use to describe a vehicle such as this?
Well, Fletch, I think of survivor, I think of utilitarian, and perhaps later, if it was still running in the 1930s, the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this even precedes Route 66. I mean, 1926, Route 66 started. I mean, this was way before then. I mean, we're almost talking roads that were, if non-existent, bullock trails.
Oh, they were, and they turned to mud.
Yep.
Part of the year, every year.
Yeah. Okay, now this vehicle has its advantages. I mean, it's high up off the ground. Its wheels in the rear are slightly bigger in diameter than the wheels in front. So it had the capability of going places, right?
It did, and it was also incredibly lightweight. It's just a little over 1 ton.
You can see too how it's made out and depicted as a family would have in the time. I mean, possibly it's hard to say. I mean, it might have been a couple and one child. Hard to say. Maybe a couple of kids. But that could be everything they had at the time, going from A to B. Whether it's to relocate, to start a new existence. I guess if they had a vehicle like this back then, they were doing okay.
They were having an automobile, and that was good. Do you know that during the Depression, when the Dust Bowl was taking place, the Soviets came and they took the Pathé newsreels and showed their Russian citizens that, look, it's terrible, the American farmer is being kicked from farm, and it backfired because the Russians said, wait a minute, they have automobiles.
Right. Yeah. So it's not too bad.
Not too bad, no.
Well, that's interesting how Route 66 began. That's a history all of its own. I mean,
it really is.
Howling winds coming up from Texas and wiping crops out, and the better life promised in the West. And everything they went through, that wasn't so much the case when a lot of them arrived over there.
No, it was a tough life. It was a very tough life.
Okay, so where do we go back with this vehicle here, John? In terms of the museum obtaining this, where did it come from, and what can you tell us in terms of its history?
We purchased it 3 years ago at the Hershey RM auction, and it was completely outfitted the way you see it, with the objects d'art in the back, or the antiques, if you will. And it just appealed to Ted, and it appealed to me in that it told a story all by itself.
What powers it?
A 2-cylinder flat opposed engine.
Back in those times when this vehicle was running about, in terms of gas stations, I mean, they must have been around, but they weren't, if that makes sense. I mean, out in the middle of nowhere, how do they put fuel in these vehicles?
Gasoline was sold by hardware stores back then. Before, really it was around this time, 1912 to 1915, when what we understand as the gas station came into being. Prior to that, it was sold at hardware stores, and it was a surplus product of making oil, of refining oil, and this was a waste product that was burned off initially.
So it would have been pretty rugged stuff, but it created the explosion and pushed the piston down the bore, and that's all it had to do.
It's all we needed it to do at the time.
Alrighty. Now, that's just amazing, man. Where do you go to see one of those? That's the first one I've ever seen in my life, just sitting there like that. You could wind the clock back past 100 years, and I don't know. I don't think it would have looked much different.
I don't think so.
We move on from that incredible contraption down there, which obviously got people around, to another vehicle that got people around, a 1913 American Scout. Teach me something about this, John.
Well, this is made in Indianapolis, part of that little cauldron of car makers down there in Indianapolis, made by a company called American Motors, which is not to be confused with the company from the 60s and 70s.
AMC.
AMC. This is same name, different company. Right. But they utilize the underslung chassis design, where the springs are on top of the chassis, and they did this to lower the mass of the car to give it a low center of gravity.
Were they one of the only companies that did that?
One of the very few, yes. Yeah, they weren't the only, but they were one of the few. Regal, there was a brand here in Detroit called Regal that did much the same.
The theory mustn't have worked all that well, because that was something that other manufacturers didn't follow suit with.
It was expensive to do.
Was it?
And its acceptance in the market was... At this point, you were all up against the Model T Ford. Yeah. And the Model T Ford just set the standard. Yeah. And this was a little unusual.
What powered it?
A 4-cylinder engine. Mm-hmm. This one is unusual in that you'll notice that it has an air compressor hooked to the engine, and it has a very rare air starting feature. Wow. As you drove, you pumped up air and stored it in a reservoir under the car, and then you parked, you got to your destination, you parked, you shut it off. Hopefully you didn't spend too long there. Right. You made your business brief.
Or you had a leak in the cylinder.
And when you came out, you flipped a valve, and it pumped the cylinders down enough to start the car. Yeah. And this is the same year that Cadillac invented the electric self-starter. Here it is with air.
John, I want to take this opportunity to thank you again for coming on your Sunday off. Well, it hasn't really been a day off for you because you've come in to do this, but you're a man of passion, and that's what Classic Restos stands for. And as I said earlier in the show as well, one of the most opulent car collections possibly in the world that you could come and see, and I really appreciate you showing us around.
Thank you, Fletch. It's been our pleasure to have you here at Stahls.
Thank you very much. Cheers, John. This particular return trip to the United States of America is a special thanks to Shannons, and I'm sure you'll agree that the incredible Stahls Collection here in Detroit is certainly jaw-dropping, and that you've really enjoyed this week's episode of Classic Restos. And as I say at the end of every show, no matter where you're watching from, until next week, please ride and drive safe. I'm Fletch, and I thank you very much for watching. You can like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Classic Restos TV and watch catch-up episodes at shannons.com.au. Classic Restos, proudly brought to you by Shannons, where you can be part of the Shannons Club, Penrite Oil, Hare and Forbes Machinery House, Pace Farm, and Duncan Foster Engineering.